They've torn my clothes. Save me. Please, that desperate cry pierced the late afternoon silence like a blade through flesh. I froze on the dirt path leading from Duskmere back to my forge on the edge of Blackwater Lake. The words were twisted with panic, but sharp enough to cut straight through me. I was hauling a load of fresh coal on my old mule, the bags clinking with every step my hammer slung heavy at my hip, like a reminder that the day's work wasn't done. The lake's wind carried the scent of mud reeds and damp stone, but now it mixed with something uglier men's laughter. Not the kind after a good drink, the drawn-out kind that feeds on someone else's weakness. Then the cry came again, weaker but fierce. Save me, please. I tugged the mule to a halt, stepping off the main path toward the water's edge. Through a thick stand of reeds I saw them. 2 men stood on the muddy bank, right where the lake lapped at the shore. One was tall and broad-shouldered, his hair matted with sweat and dirt. The other shorter, quicker, with eyes that gleamed like a rat's. Between them, an orc girl huddled, clutching the shredded remnants of her clothes. Her black hair hung wet and tangled over her shoulders and neck. Mud smeared her green skin, one cheek already swelling purple, and fresh red scratches marked her exposed shoulder. They'd ripped most of her dress to rags, tossing the pieces into the mud like it was sport. The tall one laughed low, yanking at the last scrap she held. "Who you gonna bite now, orc bitch?" She backed up a step, her feet slipping in the muck, but her eyes burned with rage, not pleading. That fire in her gaze only made the men grin wider. I didn't shout their names or warn them first. I just stepped out from the reeds hammer in hand. No need to raise it high. Just let them see the black handle, the heavy steel head squared and sharp. "Leave her be." My voice wasn't loud, but in the fading light by the quiet lake it carried. Both men turned. The short one spat on the ground. "Forge man Holt, this ain't your business." "It is now." The tall one grinned, but it faltered as I took 2 more steps into the mud. I knew these 2. Clay Wren and Mads Toller, drunks from the tavern who hunted things that couldn't fight back. They'd brought broken nails and bent sickles to my forge before, but never held my gaze for more than a heartbeat. "You gonna scrap with us over an orc?" Mads sneered. I glanced at the girl. She was trembling not from weakness but cold and fury. The tatters clung to her in humiliation anyone could see. "I'm doing it over 2 scum standing in my way home." Clay advanced half a step. "You got no right—" I hurled the hammer into the mud at his feet. The heavy thud of steel sinking into earth stopped all 3 of them cold. I spoke slow, each word deliberate. "Pick it up if you really want to test who leaves this lake with both hands." Clay didn't pick it up. Mads cursed under his breath. They exchanged glances, realizing the fun was over. They weren't warriors, not the type to spill blood over a half-ruined woman. Clay spat again and backed off. "This green slut'll belong to someone soon enough," he growled. "Not tonight," I said. They slunk away, cursing as their boots squelched through the reeds. I stood still until I was sure they'd hit the main road. Only then did I stoop to retrieve my coat, approaching, but not staring at her body. "I'll leave this here," I said, holding it out, eyes averted. "You put it on yourself." She stayed frozen for a beat, like she couldn't believe it was done. Then she snatched the coat, wrapping it tight around her shoulders and chest hands still shaking. I turned my back, giving her what dignity was left. "They're gone. If you can walk, I'll get you out of here." Behind me, just ragged breathing, then soft, almost lost in the lapping waves. "My name is Narika." I nodded, though she couldn't see. "Arin." When I turned back, she'd bundled the coat down to her knees, but the shivers hadn't stopped. The lake wind was turning bitter fast. The sun dipped low. Darkness would hide her shame, but it'd bring worse dangers. I offered my hand, not touching her. "Get on the cart. I'll take you away from the lake before full dark." She stared at my hand a long time, like her whole life no one had offered one without a price. Finally, she placed hers in mine, ice cold, but alive. And right then, I knew I hadn't just saved a girl from a muddy bank. I dragged a storm back to my wooden house. The path home skirted the lake, cutting through a scorched meadow and a line of low birches. The sun vanished before we arrived. My place sat beside the forge, a small square cabin with smoke-darkened wood walls and a low-sloped roof. Behind it, the open-air smithy with its coal pit anvil, quenching trough, and rough wooden shelter. Inside one main room, a bed, a long table stone hearth, and shelves for tools. No servants, no woman in the house, nothing soft but a few old wool blankets. When I opened the door for her, Nareka hesitated on the threshold like the door itself was something to measure first. I got it. Folks who'd been cornered often feared closed spaces more than the dark. "I'll start a fire," I said. "Sit by the hearth." She didn't argue, but didn't go deep inside either. She lingered near the walleyes, flicking quick over the window to bolt the ladder to the hayloft before edging to the low stool by the fire. I stacked wood-struck flint, hung the kettle. Flames leaped up enough light to show the bruises clearer around her wrists, on her shoulder, along her collarbone. Not a quick scuffle. Days of rough handling. I shrugged off my second coat, handing her an old linen shirt of mine. Behind the curtain there's a basin and cloths. Change. That won't do. Nareka eyed the shirt, then me. In her gaze, a silent question. "You really gonna turn your back on me?" "I'll mend the reins outside," I said. "Door's got an inside bolt. Lock it if you want." I stepped onto the porch, sat on the stool, and actually started patching the mule's reins, though my hands weren't steady. I heard the bolt slide footsteps inside, water pouring into the basin. The wind brought lake smells, mud, and a faint whiff of ale lingering from those men. I sat out there a good while until the door creaked open again. My shirt hung long on her sleeves, rolled past halfway. She'd wrung her hair, tied it back with a scrap of cloth. Without the mud caking her, I saw she was younger than I'd thought, but her eyes were weary and older by far. A thin scar ran across her throat, older than the fresh marks. Not an accident. A past's brand. "Supper's warming," I said. It was just thin bean soup with onions and salted meat. But Nareka held the bowl with both hands like it was the first warm thing she'd touched in days. She ate slow, not spilling a drop, though I saw her throat work hard against the soreness. When done, she set it down neat and looked at me across the table. "Why?" I knew what she meant. "Because I saw two bastards who deserve broken teeth." "No. Why bring me home?" I sipped cooled barley coffee. "Because if I left you at the lake, they'd come back, or others would, and wouldn't be better." Nareka went quiet. Firelight danced in her eyes like molten gold. "I can't pay you," she said finally. "Haven't asked for it." That stopped her. I figured her life hadn't had much without a cost. That night I gave her the bed, spreading my blanket on the floor by the hearth. As I doused the oil lamp, she hadn't lain down yet. Just sat on the edge, back rigid, like she didn't know what to do with safety. "If you're scared," I said into the dark, "hammer's here by the stool. Take it." "Why would you do that?" "So you can sleep." A long pause, then the bed creaked. Blankets shifted. Silence. Outside, wind battered the walls. Inside, two strangers under one roof tried to learn trust, that tonight no one would kick the door in. The cabin door creaked open under my hand, spilling faint moonlight into the dim room. Nareka paused at the threshold, her green skin pale in the shadows, eyes darting like she was mapping every corner for traps. I couldn't blame her. After what I'd seen at the lake, any closed space must feel like a cage. My place wasn't much to look at: a sturdy wooden box with walls darkened by years of forge smoke, a low roof that leaked in heavy rains, and the faint smell of iron and ash that never quite faded. The forge sat out back, its anvil and coal pit waiting for dawn, but inside was simple one main room with a bed shoved against the far wall, a rough-hewn table, a stone hearth, and shelves crammed with tools, tongs, and half-finished bits of metal. No frills, no comforts beyond what a lone smith needed to get by. "I'll get the fire going," I said, keeping my voice even. "Sit by the hearth if you can." She didn't respond, but after a moment she edged inside, hugging my coat tighter around her. Her steps were careful, testing the floorboards like they might give way. She hovered near the wall, at first scanning the window with its iron latch, the bolted door, the ladder leading up to the loft where I stored hay and spare hides. Only then did she move to the low stool by the hearth, lowering herself slowly like every muscle ached. I knelt by the fire pit, stacking dry logs and kindling, striking flint until sparks caught. The flames built quick, crackling to life and throwing orange light across the room. That's when I saw her bruises clearer dark rings around her wrists from being grabbed, raw scratches on her shoulder, a purple bloom along her collarbone that spoke of more than just a tussle. Those weren't fresh from today alone. They told of days, maybe weeks of rough treatment. Anger twisted in my gut, hot as forge coals. I'd known men like Clay and Mads all my life, cowards who fed on the weak, but seeing the marks on her made it personal. I shrugged off my spare coat, the one I'd worn over my shirt, and dug out an old linen tunic from the chest by the bed. It was worn thin in places, but clean enough. Behind that curtain, I nodded toward the corner where a heavy cloth hung, screening off a basin and pitcher. There's water and rags. Change into this. What you're in, it won't hold. She took the tunic, her fingers brushing mine for a split second, still cold as lake water. Her eyes searched my face like she was waiting for the catch, the demand that always came with help. You really gonna turn your back on me? That look said. I'll be outside mending the reins, I told her, heading for the door. Bolt it from inside if it makes you feel safer. I stepped onto the porch, the night air biting through my shirt now that I was down to one layer. I sat on the old stool, pulling the mule's harness into my lap and threading a needle with leather cord. My hands moved on habit, stitching the frayed spots, but my mind was elsewhere. Why had I brought her here? Orcs weren't welcome in these parts, not after the border wars that had scarred the land a decade back. Folks in Duskmere still whispered about raids, lost kin, green-skinned savages. I'd lost friends to those fights, seen villages burned. Helping one now could mark me as a traitor, or worse, draw trouble to my door. But that cry at the lake. They've torn my clothes. Save me, please. It echoed in my head, human enough to override the old hatreds. Mercy didn't care about skin color, it just saw suffering. Behind the door, I heard the bolt slide home. Footsteps creaked across the floor, then the splash of water in the basin. She was washing off the mud, the shame. The wind picked up, carrying the lake's chill and a faint, sour trace of ale, probably from those bastards' breath clinging to her rags. I sat there longer than needed, giving her time until the bolt scraped back and the door edged open. She stood there in my tunic, the hem falling past her knees, sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Her hair was wrung out and tied back rough with a strip of cloth. Without the grime, she looked younger, maybe mid-20s, but those eyes held years more weary and guarded. A thin scar traced her throat, faded, but deliberate, like a knife's memory from some old fight. "Supper's ready," I said, stepping inside. It was nothing fancy, thin bean soup simmered with onions and a bit of salted pork from my stores. I ladled it into bowls, setting one before her with a hunk of hard bread. She held it close, steam rising to her face, and ate slow, deliberate, like she was savoring every spoonful against the ache in her throat. I watched from across the table, not staring, but noting how she didn't waste a drop. She wasn't broken, just worn down, strong under the surface like good steel before tempering. When she finished, she set the bowl down neat and met my eyes. Why, I knew the question. Saw two men who deserved to eat dirt. No, her voice was low, steady now. Why bring me here? I sipped my cooled barley brew, the bitter taste grounding me. Left you there, they'd circle back. Or worse would find you. No good end. She went silent, firelight flickering across her features, turning her green skin to shadowed bronze. I can't repay you, she said at last. Haven't asked you to. That seemed to unsettle her more. I figured her world hadn't offered much without strings. We cleared the table in quiet, and I spread my blanket on the floor by the hearth, leaving the bed for her. As I doused the lamp, plunging us into fireglow and shadows, she sat on the edge of the mattress, back straight, like safety was a trick she didn't trust yet. If it helps, I said into the dark, hammer's right here by the stool. Grab it if you need. Why would you leave that? So you can sleep. A long beat passed. The bed groaned as she lay down, pulling the blankets up. Silence settled, broken only by the wind rattling the walls and the occasional pop of embers. Two strangers under one roof, both trying to believe the door would stay shut tonight. I lay there staring at the rafters, wondering what storm I'd invited in and why it didn't feel like a mistake. I woke before dawn, as always, the smith's habit drilled into me like hammer strikes on steel. But that morning the first sound wasn't the wind or the distant crow of roosters. It was the soft whisk of a broom across the wooden floor. Nareka was already up. She'd wrapped a cloth around her hair, sleeves rolled neat, sweeping the dried mud from my boots the night before, and gathering old ashes from the hearth into a wooden bucket. She moved like she'd known the house for years, or like idleness would drag her mind back to the lake's mud. Her steps were sure now, no more testing the boards for weakness. "I didn't ask you to do that," I said, sitting up from my blanket on the floor. "I'm not used to sitting idle." "Neither am I." We shared barley coffee in a silence less heavy than the night before. Then I headed out to the forge. Nareka followed, lingering at the threshold, her eyes tracking my every move as I fanned the coals, heated the iron, set a blank on the anvil, and brought the hammer down. The rhythmic clang echoed through the chill morning yard, and strangely it felt less lonely than any dawn in months. By midday, she'd started helping drawing water from the well, stacking coal-holding blanks with the long tongs while I bent hinges. Her hands were strong and steady despite the fading bruises on her wrists. When I asked if she'd done this kind of work before, she answered short, "I've had to learn anything that makes me useful." That reply stopped me from pressing right away. But in my head, pieces of her started fitting together: the build of a fighter, the wariness of the hunted calluses from heavy labor eyes that had seen violence up close. Afternoon, when I led her to the stable for fresh straw, something unexpected happened. My old warhorse Bran, who didn't take to strangers snorting and stamping at anyone new, lifted his head as she entered, blew a breath, and stood still. She offered the back of her hand for him to sniff, then stroked along his muzzle with a slow, precise motion. Bran lowered his head like he'd known her touch forever. "You know horses," I said. "Horses are easier than people." "Can't argue that." The corner of her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Over the next few days, she wove into the rhythm of the place. She mended the coat I'd given her that first night, her stitches tight, and even on the torn fabric dragged through the reeds, not the work of a village girl, but someone who'd patched soft armor or sewn leather on long trails. Evenings, we'd sit on the porch watching the lake reeds turn purple under the setting sun, not saying much. But the quiet wasn't empty anymore. It felt like shared ground. I changed too. I started patching the roof, adding extra bolts to the door, sharpening the long knife, checking the old hunting crossbow hung since last season. Nareka didn't ask why, but I knew she understood. Men like Clay and Mads weren't the type to swallow humiliation once. One rainy afternoon, as water pattered on the roof, she told me her story in fragments like pulling thorns from flesh. Her father was a minor branch in House Narek, one of the oldest orc clans in the southern borders, rich in horses, iron, and stubborn as mountain stone. When he died, the inheritance land mounts, even her mother's share, was snatched by relatives. Her mother wasted away last winter work to exhaustion and sickness. Naraka herself became a burden too strong to starve quietly, too proud to bow as a meek servant. In the end, they sold her to a horse trader who doubled as a slaver cheap just to keep the clan's name clean of open blood. That trader was the one whose cart overturned on the road. He'd meant to haul her to the slave market south of the lake, but Clay and Mads had asked to sample the goods first. He'd agreed. She'd chosen to fight even if it meant dying. I listened, my chest heating like I'd swallowed red coals. It wasn't that I was naive to the world's filth. Humans and orcs alike had their share of rot. But now that story sat across from me, stitching my coat with hands that had been bound and bartered. Anger boiled slow in me, the kind that forges resolve. Nareka watched me, her voice flat. "You can send me away now. I'd understand. I've lost a day's work for you, a coat, even my bed. Send you off now, what do I gain?" This time, she let out a short laugh. Hoarse, surprised, not pretty in a gentle way, but it lit the room like a fresh flame. And right then, I knew something in her was coming back to life. The trembling girl from the lake was fading, replaced by someone who'd survived worse and was ready to stand again. As the rain drummed on, I realized I wasn't just giving her shelter. I was watching her rebuild piece by piece, and it stirred something in me I'd thought long buried. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel like just a roof over my head. It felt like a place where broken things could mend. 2 weeks passed, and Nareka wasn't the trembling girl from the lake anymore. Her bruises yellowed and faded, the welts on her wrists turning to faint shadows. Her steps grew firm again, carrying her through the yard like she belonged there. She worked beside me now, holding iron steady on the anvil, dousing hot metal in the trough, even mixing clay to patch the forge cracks. We'd push the coal cart together, her strength matching mine without a word. Even Bran, the old horse, nickered soft when she approached, letting her curry his coat or check his hooves. Mornings, she'd rise before me, sometimes kindling the hearth or drawing water, turning the house from a silent shell into something lived in. I changed, too. I patched the roof leaks I'd ignored for months, drove extra stakes into the fence, honed the long knife till it could split a hair, and oiled the old crossbow, stringing it fresh. Nareka didn't comment, but her eyes followed my hands as I worked, knowing why. Men like Clay and Mads didn't fade quietly after a humiliation. They'd stew and strike back. The thought gnawed at me during quiet moments, lying on the floor at night, staring at the rafters, wondering if helping her would cost me the only life I had left. But regret none. Her presence filled the empty spaces I'd grown used to, making the forge's clang less echoing, the evenings less hollow. One afternoon the sun hung dry and red over the fields when the neighbor's dog barked sharp from the road. I was mid-swing on a hoe-blade hammer ringing against the anvil when hoofbeats followed. 3 riders crested the rise dust, kicking up behind them as they trotted through my open gate like they owned the place. Clay let his broad frame slouched in the saddle. Mads flanked right, smirking. The third was bigger face scarred, like it had been dragged through gravel, eyes cold as quenched steel. I didn't know him, but one look said he was the kind who'd kill for a handful of silver. They reined in at the fence, gazes sweeping the yard like hounds scenting prey. Heard the Smith Holtz hoarding gold in his shack, Mads drawled, leaning forward. Turns out it's a woman. I set the hammer down, slow, not breaking eye contact. Get off my land. Clay braced his hands on the pommel, grinning thin. We're just here for what we didn't finish at the lake. Behind me, the cabin door swung open. Nareka stepped out. She wore the dark tunic I'd traded for her in town last week, sleeves rolled, tight hair bound back firm. No blanket, no shakes, no mud, just those eyes, hard as fresh-forged iron now. I'm right here, she said. Say what you want plain. The 3 men paused a beat. Maybe they hadn't expected the prey from the lake to stand in the yard like she owned it too. Clay recovered first. We want you on a horse heading back so the trader gets his silver's worth. So you're still trafficking, I said. Harsh word, Mads chuckled. I reached for the crossbow, leaning against the porch post, not loading it yet. And I call it this, I said. 1 hoof past that fence I shoot. The scarred one drew a knife from his saddle sheath, lips curling. A smith with a rusty bow threatening who? I'm not threatening, I replied. Just telling so I don't waste time burying. The air stretched taut as wire in the forge. Nareka moved to my side, close enough her shoulder nearly brushed my arm. That mattered more than words. She wasn't hiding behind me. She stood level. Clay flicked his eyes from her to me. You think you can keep her? Long types like her bring nothing but trouble. Nareka spoke before I could. Trouble for types like you? Yes. A second later, Mads spurred his horse half a step forward, maybe thinking it'd make her flinch back. But Nareka didn't budge. I cocked the crossbow bolt aimed square at his chest. The scarred one gripped his sword hilt. Bran stamped in the stable, sensing the tension like a coming storm. Then Nareka did something that silenced all 3. She snatched the shovel leaning against the porch step, strode down 2 paces, and drove the blade deep into the earth before her. I've run enough, she said, voice not loud but clear across the yard. If you want to take me again, dismount and try. It wasn't a young fool's taunt. It was the declaration of someone pushed to the edge with no more ground to give. Clay studied her face, then the crossbow in my hands, then the yard, the forge, the stable, the fence, like he was seeing for the first time that this wasn't just a lone smith's empty hut anymore. It was a stand. He cursed, yanking the reins to wheel his horse. Mads and the scarred one followed, though the last threw back a look that promised blood debt later. As the dust settled, I lowered the crossbow. My palms were slick with sweat I hadn't noticed building. They'll come back, I said. I know. I could get you north past the lakelands. Nareka shook her head. If I keep running, they'll only know I'm still something to chase. She gazed at the house, the stable, the forge, the whole yard we'd just defended. I don't want this to be a place I pass through and lose." Those words hit me harder than any hammer blow, because they meant this wasn't my house alone anymore. We stood there a moment longer, the sun dipping lower, painting the fields bloody red. Her standing beside me, shovel still in hand, felt like forge-welded iron, two pieces joined stronger than before. I'd saved her from the lake out of instinct, but now this was choice. Hers to stay, mine to stand with her. The thought warmed me deeper than any fire, chasing away the chill of what might come. And in that fading light, our bond grew unbreakable. 3 days later, I took Nareka into town, not to hide or flee, not to beg the law for help in these lakelands. Justice trailed slower than a dull blade. I took her there because I didn't want her living like a shadow tucked away in my forge. If Clay and his ilk aimed to twist her into a filthy tavern tale, then the folks in Duskmere needed to see they'd failed. She walked tall beside me as we hitched the cart and rolled down the dirt road, the sun slanting warm across the fields. She wore the new dark tunic and soft leather boots I'd bartered for her last week, her hair bound back chin level. No one could glance at her and think, "Pray," anymore. The square buzzed with midday trade farmers haggling over grain sacks, kids chasing stray chickens, the blacksmith's hammer from the town forge clanging distant like an echo of my own. Eyes turned as we walked through. They remembered the lake whispers, the 3 riders slinking away from my gate with faces like slapped dogs. Nareka met the stairs, steady, not defiant, just present, like she had every right to the cobblestones under her feet. I led her to the general store first. The old proprietress behind the counter eyed us both, but when I laid coin on the wood for more cloth, salt, strong thread, and a few sundries, she didn't pry. Just nodded, wrapped the goods neat, and handed them over. It was a small respect rare in this town where orc blood still stirred old grudges from the wars. I saw Nareka notice it. Her shoulders eased a fraction as we stepped back into the sun. We stopped at the guard post, too. Not because I trusted those lazy badges to hunt Clay down quick, but to lay the words official before rumors warped them worse. I named the 3 men described their threats at my gate, the dust-up by the lake. Then Nareka spoke for herself. The tearing of clothes, the trader's sale, the bruises from being dragged like goods. She said it clear voice, unwavering, no tremble. The captain scowled not at her, but at the mess he knew types like Clay had skated free too long, staining the town's edges. As we left the post, Nareka paused in the sunlight, standing still for a long breath. Finally, she exhaled slow. "I thought retelling it would make me want to kill someone. You didn't. That's something. I'm serious. So am I." This time she smiled, thin, a bit odd in its sound, but enough to catch in my throat like a good laugh. We headed home before dusk, the cart rumbling over ruts, the lake gleaming silver on our left. Nareka didn't climb down right away when we pulled up to the gate. She stared at the wheel tracks, the fence, the forge, then turned to me. "If I stay," she said, words measured like she was forging each one, "it's not because I've no other path. It's because I want to. I get it. Do you truly? I don't want to be the one sheltered, then reminded one day I owe the roof, the food, the warmth." I leaned an elbow on the cart rail, meeting her eyes square. "I don't want someone indebted to me for life over one lakeside night. If you stay, do it as part of this house. Work, argue, eat at the table. Mend fences, tend the horse, curse me when I'm thick-headed. But not to pay back." She held my gaze long. Wind rustled the grass, the stable roof stray strands of her hair across her cheek. Then she nodded. "Agreed." One word, but it settled everything in me quiet. That evening we ate potato stew, flatbread, and smoked meat. After Nareka grabbed the shovel from the porch, strode to the patch of earth by the gate, and drove it deep, starting a small hole. I watched, puzzled. She motioned for the spare wooden post leaning against the wall. I fetched it. She set it upright, packed dirt firm around the base, tamped it solid, then drew her knife and carved into the face 3 slashes crossing a curved line. "What's the mark?" I asked. "For one who chooses to stay?" she replied. "Your clan's no." She turned to me. "This house's." I couldn't speak for a moment. Night fell. The lake wind wasn't as biting anymore. I built up the fire, dragged another stool close to the hearth. Nareka didn't hover by the door. She sat in the glow nearer the table, nearer the hammer I still left out each night, nearer than the distance that once left room to run. "Aaron," she called. I turned. "I thought if I ever survived all that, I'd need no one." She watched the flame's voice, slow and true. But it turns out, not no one. Just hadn't met the one who doesn't make me feel held captive. I stepped closer, pausing just before her stool. And now, she looked up. Her eyes held no more lake shadows, not gone entirely, but overpowered by something stronger. "Now I want to stay here with you and see what this house can become." I set a hand on her chair, back leaning down slow, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But she didn't, just held my eyes calm, certain. I touched my forehead to hers, a beat not rushed, not greedy, just our first closeness freely chosen. Out there, Blackwater stayed, dark reeds hissing in the wind, the world beyond the gate full of men like clay. But in the smith's wooden house, an orc girl had stopped trembling, a new post stood by the gate, and a simple truth I could finally admit: I hadn't just saved her from the lake. She'd pulled me from the cold life I'd thought was mine forever. And for the first time in ages, as I doused the light for sleep, I didn't dwell on what was lost. I thought of tomorrow.